This film murders a smiling little girl on screen at point blank range while she stands at an ice cream truck holding a cone, and the child actress who played her grew up to become a real housewife of Beverly Hills and the aunt of Paris Hilton. This is Assault on Precinct 13, John Carpenter's brutal 1976 siege thriller about a skeleton crew trapped in a shut-down Los Angeles police station as a faceless gang lays siege to them. Today, we count down 15 weird facts and stick around for number one, because the strangest thing about this movie happened after filming. To the woman who walks off into the dark in its final shot. Subscribe and drop a comment with your most underrated Carpenter film. Let's get into it. The most notorious moment in Assault on Precinct 13 is the sudden, brutal killing of a young girl named Kathy. In the scene, she happily approaches an ice cream truck to buy a vanilla twist, and a gang member calmly shoots her dead at point-blank range. It is abrupt, graphic, and genuinely shocking. An act of violence so casual and so cruel that it tells the audience immediately that this film has no rules and no mercy. The little girl was played by a child actress named Kim Richards, and her later life took an extraordinary turn. At the time, Richards was already a working child star. Just the year before, in 1975, she had appeared in the beloved Disney film Escape to Witch Mountain, the very picture of wholesome family entertainment. But decades later, Kim Richards found a whole new kind of fame. She became one of the stars of the reality television juggernaut, The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And through her family connections, she is the aunt of Paris Hilton, the socialite and celebrity by way of her half-sister, Kathy Hilton. So, the pigtailed little girl gunned down at the ice cream truck in a grimy 1976 cult thriller grew up into Beverly Hills reality royalty. Few career arcs in film history are stranger. That ice cream truck killing very nearly destroyed the film's chances of release. When the Motion Picture Association reviewed Assault on Precinct 13, the board, then led by Richard Hefner, was so disturbed by the graphic murder of a child that it threatened to slap the film with an X rating unless the scene was removed. An X rating in 1976 would have been commercially crippling, associating the film with pornography and shutting it out of most theaters and advertising. Carpenter was told the scene had to go. He refused to lose it, and instead he pulled off a piece of low-budget cunning that was, by his own account, a common trick of the era. Following his distributor's advice, Carpenter prepared a version of the film with the offending scene cut out and submitted only that sanitized copy to the ratings board. The board, satisfied, granted the film its R rating. Then Carpenter simply shipped the original, uncut version, ice cream scene fully intact, to theaters. The ruse worked completely. Audiences saw the child killing that the ratings board believed had been removed. Carpenter has since admitted he regrets shooting the scene as explicitly as he did, calling himself young and stupid at the time, but the deception got his uncompromised film onto screens. Here is a fact that undercuts the movie's own famous name. There is no Precinct 13 in Assault on Precinct 13. Watch the film closely and you will hear the station identified over the police radio as Precinct 9, Division 13. The title is, strictly speaking, a misnomer referring to a precinct that does not exist in the story, and John Carpenter did not choose it. In fact, it was never what he wanted to call his film at all. Carpenter's original screenplay was titled The Anderson Alamo, a reference to the Los Angeles neighborhood where the story unfolds, and to John Wayne's 1960 siege epic The Alamo. At another point, the working title became simply The Siege. But when the small distributor who picked up the film prepared it for release, they rejected Carpenter's titles and invented a new one during post-production, choosing Assault on Precinct 13 purely because they felt the number 13 sounded more ominous and marketable. So one of the most beloved cult titles in film history is a marketing department's invention, describing a location that appears nowhere in the movie, imposed over the objections of the director whose name is now forever attached to it. There is a further irony in the choice. The distributor selected the number 13 precisely for its superstitious, unlucky, ominous ring, betting that audiences would find it more menacing on a marquee. It worked so well that the title has become iconic, spawning a 2005 remake and lodging itself permanently in film culture, all built around a number that means nothing within the story itself. Carpenter's carefully chosen, historically resonant titles were tossed aside for a piece of pure superstition, and the superstition won. Assault on Precinct 13 is, beneath its urban crime thriller surface, a western in disguise, and specifically it is a loving reworking of Rio Bravo, the 1959 Howard Hawks classic starring John Wayne. Carpenter worshipped Howard Hawks, and he essentially transplanted the plot of Rio Bravo, a small band of lawmen and misfits holding a jailhouse against its surrounding force, into a modern Los Angeles police station besieged by a street gang. The influence runs so deep that characters toss weapons and wry remarks to each other under fire exactly as Wayne and Dean Martin do in the original. Carpenter buried his tribute directly into the credits in a way most viewers never catch. He edited the film himself, but rather than use his own name, he took an editing credit under the pseudonym John T. Chance. That name is not random. John T. Chance is the name of John Wayne's character in Rio Bravo. So Carpenter signed the physical construction of his film with the name of the fictional hero of the movie that inspired it, a private act of homage hidden in plain sight. It is the kind of cinephile Easter egg that reveals just how much this lean genre thriller was, at heart, a young director's love letter to the Hollywood westerns that raised him. The deal that produced Assault on Precinct 13 was tangled up with a completely different and much glossier film in a way almost no one remembers. Around this period, John Carpenter was working as a screenwriter for hire, and he wrote a script for a stylish, psychological thriller about a fashion photographer who has visions of murders through a killer's eyes. That script was sold and eventually became the 1978 film Eyes of Laura Mars, directed by Irvin Kershner and starring Faye Dunaway and Tommy Lee Jones. The connection gets more surprising. The producer who bought Eyes of Laura Mars, John Peters, reportedly acquired it as a potential vehicle for his then-girlfriend, Barbra Streisand, one of the biggest stars in the world. Streisand ultimately declined to star, reportedly put off by the dark and kinky nature of the material, though she did end up performing the film's theme song. With that glossy thriller sold off and out of their hands, the producers behind Carpenter could turn their full attention and their modest money toward his other, grittier project, the siege film that became Assault on Precinct 13. So a Streisand vehicle and a $100,000 exploitation thriller grew from the same young writer's output at the same moment, two wildly different films sharing a single origin. The antagonists of Assault on Precinct 13, the multi-ethnic street gang called Street Thunder, are unlike almost any villains in a crime film, and that is entirely by design. They barely speak. They have no real individual personalities, no memorable dialogue, no negotiation. They simply keep coming, wave after wave, absorbing gunfire and losses without hesitation or fear, an implacable and almost supernatural force. And the reason they feel less like criminals and more like a horror movie monster is that Carpenter consciously modeled them on one. Carpenter has openly acknowledged that the relentless gang was directly inspired by the zombies of George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Like Romero's undead, the members of Street Thunder are deliberately dehumanized, faceless, silent, and terrifyingly resilient, a mass rather than a set of characters. This choice is what gives the film its unique and unsettling tone, fusing the structure of a Western siege with the dread of a zombie picture. The gang is essentially a horde of the living dead wearing street clothes, and the police station under siege becomes the besieged farmhouse of Night of the Living Dead relocated to the city. It is a genre collision that would define much of Carpenter's later career, and it started here, with a gang written to move like ghouls. The filmmakers built a small, personal detail into the very geography of the movie that almost no viewer could ever know. At one point, a sign is erected in front of the besieged police station displaying its address, listed as 1977 Ellendale Place. That address was not invented for the film, and it was not the real location's address either. It was John Carpenter's own home address, the place where he actually lived when he first moved to Los Angeles. It is a quiet, almost intimate signature, the director quite literally putting his own front door onto the building at the center of his film. There is something fitting about it too, given how personal this production was to Carpenter, his first true professional feature, written, directed, scored, and edited by him, made with total creative control on a shoestring. By stamping his own address onto the doomed precinct, he embedded himself into the fabric of the movie in a way that goes beyond the usual director's touches. The fortress that his heroes defend against an unstoppable horde bears the number of the young filmmaker's own home, a small private marker hidden inside the fiction. It is worth noting how little of the film's world was actually a single place to begin with. Carpenter assembled the precinct's geography from scattered locations, using the exteriors of a genuinely shut-down police station in Venice, California, intercut with footage of South Central Los Angeles for the surrounding streets, while the interior was a set built on a soundstage. The seamless, claustrophobic building that feels so real on screen was stitched together from pieces of a city and onto that patchwork fortress. Carpenter grafted the address of the home where his own Los Angeles story had begun. One of the film's most memorable figures is Wells, a wisecracking convict who is being transported through the precinct when the siege breaks out and who ends up fighting alongside the defenders. Wells was played by Tony Burton, and Carpenter's casting of him carried a striking, real-world resonance. Burton was reportedly cast in the role of the convict, at least in part because he had genuinely served time in prison himself, having done a stint behind bars for armed robbery. The man playing a criminal had a real criminal past to draw upon. Burton brought an authenticity to the role that a purely trained actor might have struggled to find, and his career would go on to a notable second act in a completely different register. Tony Burton became widely recognized as Tony Duke Evers, the loyal trainer and corner man in the Rocky film series, appearing across multiple entries in that beloved franchise. So the actor who lent real, ex-convict authenticity to a gritty Carpenter siege thriller became, to millions of moviegoers, a warm and familiar face from one of the most popular sports movie sagas ever made. It is a reminder of how many of these lean 1970s genre films were staffed by performers carrying remarkable and unexpected life stories. If you love these deep dives into the lean, mean cult classics of the 1970s, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which John Carpenter movie you think is the most underrated of his career. Alright, back to The Siege. The pulsing, minimalist synthesizer score of Assault on Precinct 13 is one of its most celebrated features, a hypnotic and menacing piece of music that Carpenter composed and performed himself in a mere 3 days. That driving main theme has been enormously influential on electronic and film music in the decades since, and it helped establish the stark, synth-driven sound that would become Carpenter's signature, most famously in Halloween 2 years later. But the inspirations behind it are surprising and specific. By Carpenter's own account, he built the score by drawing on two very different sources. One was Lalo Schifrin's tense, jazzy score for the 1971 Clint Eastwood thriller Dirty Harry, a fitting influence for another gritty urban crime story. The other, more unexpectedly, was Led Zeppelin. Carpenter has said the propulsive, insistent rhythm of his main theme was inspired in part by Led Zeppelin's thunderous rock anthem Immigrant Song. So the coiled, driving pulse that underscores the siege owes a debt to one of the heaviest rock songs of the era, filtered through banks of synthesizers by a young director racing to finish a score in 72 hours. The result is one of the most iconic low-budget scores in film history, part Dirty Harry and part hard rock. Working quietly behind the scenes on Assault on Precinct 13, in an uncredited capacity, was a young woman named Deborah Hill, who served as an assistant editor on the film. At the time, she was a relatively unknown figure in the industry, taking on whatever work she could get on this scrappy, low-budget production. Her contribution to Assault went unlisted, a small early credit lost in the machinery of a tiny movie. But her collaboration with John Carpenter was only beginning, and it would soon become one of the most important creative partnerships in horror history. Just 2 years later, Deborah Hill would team with Carpenter to co-write and produce Halloween, the 1978 film that became the most successful, independent movie of its time and effectively launched the entire modern slasher genre. Hill went on to become one of the most respected and powerful female producers in a male-dominated industry, shaping numerous films across her career until her death in 2005. It is remarkable to realize that this hugely influential figure was there at the very start of Carpenter's professional career, quietly cutting film on a besieged police station thriller, an uncredited assistant on the movie that gave Carpenter the confidence to make her and himself famous. Their partnership would prove one of the most fruitful in the genre, extending across films like The Fog and Escape from New York, but it began here, in the editing room of a tiny siege picture, with her name left off the credits entirely. When Assault on Precinct 13 opened in the United States of America in November 1976, it landed with a thud. Reviews were mixed, the box office was unimpressive, and the little siege thriller seemed destined to vanish into obscurity, another forgotten low-budget genre picture. The film that would come to be regarded as a cult masterpiece was, in its home country, essentially a flop. Its salvation came from across the Atlantic. European audiences and critics embraced the film with an enthusiasm America had withheld. It screened at the Cannes Film Festival, where it electrified viewers. The director, George Romero, whose own Night of the Living Dead had inspired the film, was at Cannes and reportedly declared that Carpenter had wiped them off the face of the earth with Precinct 13, adding that from the moment the little girl gets blown away, he was blown away. The momentum built through the Edinburgh Film Festival and reached its peak at the London Film Festival in late 1977, where the film finally received the serious critical acclaim it had been denied at home. That European triumph gave Carpenter the reputation, the confidence, and the industry cachet he needed to make his next film, Halloween. In a real sense, Europe rescued Assault on Precinct 13, and in doing so, it helped launch one of horror's greatest careers. The breakout character of Assault on Precinct 13 is Napoleon Wilson, the enigmatic death row bound convict played by Darwin Jostin, who becomes an unlikely hero during the siege. Cool, laconic, and endlessly requesting a cigarette with his signature line, "Gotta smoke?" Wilson is a figure of pure mysterious charisma, his crimes and his past deliberately left vague. Carpenter wrote the role specifically for Jostin, who happened to be his next-door neighbor, and he built the character out of the Western and spaghetti Western archetypes he loved. Wilson's clearest ancestor is the silent, vengeful gunslinger known only as Harmonica, played by Charles Bronson in Sergio Leone's epic Once Upon a Time in the West. The connection is made almost explicit in the dialogue. When Wilson is asked to explain himself, he echoes Bronson's character with the cryptic reply that he will explain, but only at the point of dying. This borrowed line ties Wilson directly to Leone's mythic, laconic Avenger, and it deepens the sense that Napoleon Wilson belongs less to a 1970s crime drama than to the dusty, operatic world of the Western. Carpenter took the coolest archetype in cinema, the man of few words and mysterious purpose, and dropped him into a besieged Los Angeles police station. There is a lovely piece of casting history behind the character too. Darwin Jostin, who plays Wilson and gives the film much of its soul, was not a star. He was a working theater and television actor who happened to live right next door to Carpenter, and the two had become friends. Carpenter wrote the role of Napoleon Wilson specifically for his neighbor, and Jostin repaid that faith with a performance so magnetic that many viewers walk away convinced they have just watched a major star. The mix of stoicism, dry wit, and unexpected tenderness Jostin brought to Wilson turned a supporting anti-hero into the film's most beloved figure, all from a friend cast from across the fence. Making a film for under $100,000 forces a director to be endlessly resourceful, and Carpenter developed a clever technique to make his tiny budget stretch further, one he has spoken about openly as a tactic for low-budget filmmaking in general. The trick was to shoot as little actual footage as possible while consuming as much screen time as he could. Rather than cutting rapidly between many expensive setups, he would let single, unbroken shots run long, filling the running time with sustained takes that were quick and cheap to film. You can see this strategy at work in the film's deliberately paced opening stretch, in moments such as a lengthy, unhurried shot simply following Lieutenant Bishop as he walks from his house and gets into his car. These extended, quiet takes cost almost nothing to produce since they required minimal setups and little film stock, yet they eat up screen time, and crucially, they build a slow, simmering tension before the violence erupts. What began as a budget-saving necessity became an artistic virtue, giving the film's first act an eerie calm and a mounting sense of dread. Carpenter turned the limitations of his shoestring production into a defining feature of the film's ominous rhythm. One of the most chilling and distinctive qualities of Assault on Precinct 13 is how quiet its violence is. The members of the besieging gang carry weapons fitted with silencers, so that when they open fire on the police station and mow down anyone in their path, the gunshots produce only muffled, soft thuds rather than thunderous cracks. An all-out assault, a sustained massacre, plays out in an eerie, muted hush, the attackers advancing and killing almost noiselessly in the dark. The effect is deeply unnerving, and it serves the film's central theme of isolation. Because the siege is nearly silent, the surrounding city never realizes anything is wrong. Ordinary life continues just streets away, oblivious, while a desperate battle for survival rages in the darkened precinct, unheard. The defenders are cut off not by distance but by silence itself, trapped in a pocket of violence that the world outside cannot hear. This muffled quality also heightens the horror movie atmosphere, making the relentless gang feel even more ghostly and unstoppable as they kill without noise. In a film full of clever choices born partly of a tiny budget, the near-silent massacre stands out as a genuinely inspired one. turning the simple detail of a silencer into a pervasive mood of dread and abandonment. The film's female lead is Lee, the tough, calm, quietly heroic secretary of the Precinct, played by an actress named Lori Zimmer. Lee is the film's version of the classic Hawksian woman, cool under fire and every bit the equal of the men around her. And in the movie's final moments, she famously walks off into the night, shrugging off a paramedic's offer to treat the gunshot wound in her arm. It is an unforgettable exit, and it turned out to be strangely prophetic, because Lori Zimmer herself then walked out of Hollywood and all but disappeared. After a small handful of roles, Zimmer's acting career simply faded away, and she vanished from public life so completely that she became a genuine mystery to the film's devoted fans, who wondered for years what had become of the striking, self-possessed woman from Assault on Precinct 13. Her disappearance became so intriguing that a filmmaker eventually made an entire documentary devoted to trying to find her and discover what had happened to her life after the movie. A film essentially about the search for a vanished cult actress. It is a haunting, real-world echo of her character's final scene. Lee walks off alone into the darkness at the end of the film, wounded and unbowed, and the woman who played her walked off into a real obscurity so total that people are still asking, decades later, where exactly she went. So there you have it. 15 weird facts about a $100,000 thriller that killed a future Real Housewife at an ice cream truck, smuggled its child murder past the ratings board, and hid a John Wayne character's name in its credits. It disguised a Western as a crime film, a zombie horde as a street gang, and a rock anthem as a synthesizer score. America ignored it, Europe crowned it, and its steely heroine walked off into a darkness so complete that we are still looking for her.